Well. Sorry about that late start. We're about 10 minutes behind the clock. Technical issues behind the scenes for once, not my fault, which is a real change in tone here, but we'll roll with it with a 9-minute shorter show than we had initially planned. What's up, guys? How you doing? As you could tell by the misspelled graphic in the lower third, I am Rob. This is Rob's MV. And this show is the Nocturnal Knockout, a podcast on the Brass Ring Media YouTube channel. How you guys feeling? How's everyone's wrestling hangover going? We had a lot this weekend. There was a lot of ingesting of wrestling content this weekend. We're going to talk about some of it, mostly one show. But I got to say, this was a unique weekend in wrestling. And we'll talk all about it here in a minute. I'm going to set the record straight on some things regarding AEW's All In. We're also, time permitting, going to take a look at wins in wrestling that felt, quote unquote, real. You know, like when you really cared about the outcome, when it seems like even though the awareness of kayfabe is there, there's still a catharsis with the victory. And if we have a little bit of time on the back end, but I don't want to cut in too much into your dynamite this week, we will talk a little Naomi and maybe talk a little bit of the return of Roman, the theoretical injury of Seth, and anything else we can get lost in the next hour or so. As I mentioned, I am Rob. This is the Nocturnal Knockout. You guys are quiet so far. This is different. Last couple weeks, you guys have been all over the chat. You guys have been keeping the conversation going, keeping the show going, keeping the show on and off track, which are both things that I need out of you guys. So what I do need from you guys, though, on top of that, is I need you guys to get involved, start talking, start chatting. And if you really, really, really want to support the show and be a direct supporter of this show, you can go ahead and send one of your generous super chats. Of course, if you just want to support the brand as a whole, you can always become a member, get on Patreon, and plenty of content for you with that membership. You have all those post shows that we've been doing all week with tons of wrestling, yields tons of the members only post shows where they really deep dive into these cards. So all that is just there for you to sink your teeth into. Late start's got me a little thrown off, guys. It's like everything's got me thrown off, though, because it's so rare that we come out of a wrestling weekend with a wrestling hangover and any of us actually feel good about what we've consumed over the weekend. What's up, Maddie? Good to talk to you again. I think for like the last 15 years, we've been used to these weekends full of wrestling. But in almost every other scenario, when I can think of these overloaded wrestling weekends, which tend to be WrestleMania weekends, let's be honest, there is a bit of a hangover. There is a bit of like the Sunday after Thanksgiving kind of feeling. Like most of the time, it's like one really good wrestling show, but because of the scope of the wrestling weekend, there's just tons and tons of wrestling. So a lot of it is kind of tedious. You get a little lost in the sauce with all of it. And quite frankly, you just get fatigued from watching so much of the same product that you don't feel good about it. I was talking to someone about this the other day in person, and we were talking not about wrestling, just talking about how you spend the weekend. You know, some of those weekends when you're bored and you just eat, and then you go get fast food, and then you realize you're not satisfied, so you make something else in the kitchen, and you keep eating and never satisfied and never satisfied and never satisfied. And then you get to like Monday and you feel like crap. You feel horrible. You feel like you almost shouldn't have taken the weekend because you feel so bad. That's how most wrestling weekends feel like. This was a version of a wrestling weekend, though, where like your weekend or your vacation, the whole goal was just simply to eat really good food, to dine out, to relax, and to enjoy every minute of it. Now, I wouldn't say every minute of wrestling was ridiculously good this weekend, There were definitely some low points for sure, but on balance, if you watched a lot of wrestling this weekend, regardless of company, quite frankly, you had to be pretty satisfied with what we had. And I don't think we're necessarily in a wrestling boom by any objective measures, although WWE was hot for the last year or so. It does feel like we're in a pretty good place though, with multiple companies that have a lot of talent and use them fairly well, all things considered. And we've been in that situation and been in that landscape for a few years now. But this last weekend was finally like the first manifestation of that really coming to fruition, where we get to benefit from the lack of a monopoly in wrestling. Like, everything didn't have to. Usually, we're used to these WrestleMania weekends where everything else was so underground outside of the main show. This weekend, that was not the case. What was the show of the weekend, match of the weekend for you guys? Though, put that in the chat as the show goes along. I want to know that. I want to get your feedback. Was it All In? Was it Evolution? Was it Super Card of Honor, which I thought was a very good show, especially that main event? Or, if you're brave enough, was it Saturday night's main event? Third option could be Monday Night Raw, because it was a very eventful edition of Monday Night Raw. Plenty of wrestling to talk about. So instead of talking about a lot of really cool wrestling, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna bust out a gimmick on you guys, because I decided I'm going to set the record straight. So if I'm going to do that, I got to have the proper authority to set the record straight on something. So I'll turn off my camera for like just a half a second here. Real quick. Look at that. I've disappeared. What's up, Fernando? All right. Now we're on track. Now we're set for this segment. So, for those of you listening on audio, I have made a wardrobe change. We're going to call this, what do we call this? DJ Rob Spin, I don't know. We'll think of something like that. You guys can come up with a name. The point of this ridiculous way that I'm dressed is I thought I'm going to set the record straight on the few talking points that came out of All In. Now, we have a few accessories to help us set the record straight. Couldn't get the audio quite working for this week. Maybe if this turns out to be a hit segment that's taken over all of wrestling media, we'll add the audio to it. But in the meantime, we have my own turntable here from the old vinyl player to set the record straight, or we can use Grandmaster Rob. I like that. Or we can use our actual DJ setup here, which is not plugged in right now. But when I figure out the audio patching, that's actually where we can get the audio to set the record straight. Now, what I'm going to set the record straight on is a few talking points that have come out based on All In. And I got to say, this is the deal. This is the whole point with the Grandmaster Rob fit that we're going with here. If I set the record straight, that is law. That is final. There is nothing to be said. There can be no arguments about that unless you have an argument in the chat. You are more than welcome to get in the chat and disagree with me and cause some conversation. But I got to say, the name is, as Fernando put it, and we'll just put it in there. Well, I'll leave your chat up unless someone sends a really good chat or a super chat. It's just going to be up there. That way it covers my name and it will just be Grandmaster Rob. And that is the tact that we are taking with this. Okay. So the first thing I want to set the record straight on was the length of the All In show this weekend. By, I think, most estimates, unless something else has come in, All In 2025, I believe, was the longest wrestling pay-per-view of all time. As I have it pulled up here on the old Wikipedia, it does not have a runtime, but I don't know. It's aired at noon over here and went off the air like past 7. It was a long, 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 long wrestling show, an excessively long wrestling show. And for a show that had tons of well received matches, tons of big time storylines, all kinds of stuff. All of that stuff, all that overload of wrestling for a show that was well received. The one criticism I think that is pretty valid and can be debated and will be debated forever would be the length of that show. So Maddie said, yes, it beat WrestleMania 25, a historically late show, WrestleMania 35. WrestleMania 30 show ran so late that it broke like the New York transit system. Okay. That's how long that was. This wasn't the case. But if we were going to have talking points about, what happened this weekend at All In, let's talk about the length of the show because that was fairly significant. Now, we've talked about this a lot in the past. WWE, with the exception of SmackDown, but they have remedied that in the last couple of weeks. They have, believe it or not, gone to shorter shows with just a huge ass volume of shows. B squared, is that who you're thinking of, E? Am I affecting a B squared kind of thing? I need the nux. Back to the length because length is important. Yes, a wrestling show that is 7 hours or whatever the hell it was is way too damn long out of context. I would never recommend anyone ever to book a wrestling show that is as long as what we got on Saturday. However, as a grandmaster, I must declare, for every rule, there is some exception. And in the case of the AEW runtime for this pay-per-view, this was the one time that I think you can justifiably, with integrity, put on a show of this length. There's a few factors that were at play here. One, I appreciate that they kept the UK start time. Now, I get it. As Americans, we always bug about the time zones being catered specifically to us. And our friends across the pond, they got to adjust our American time slots, except for All In. That's supposed to air in a primetime slot for the UK fans. Obviously, this year, that was not the case. But they kept the All In start time. So whatever issues that you could have by a 6-hour wrestling show, they were at least remedied by the fact that when that last match went on, you might have been fatigued by wrestling, but you weren't so fatigued by life like you usually are at the end of a 7-hour WrestleMania, where it's Sunday night. You got work and school the next day. Kids have to be put to bed, and you're there watching Ronda Rousey and Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair in a triple threat. That is what life usually is. So if there's ever a time to put on a 6-hour pay-per-view, it's when you have a ridiculously early start time. Also, you kind of got to have the card. Now, we can argue if they have the card for a 6-hour show, because I think you could just take the triple main events and the Young Bucks match, and you would have an amazing, flawless, obviously tighter show. All of the other things that happen outside of those matches honestly went a little too long, were a little frivolous. And I say frivolous, not that they don't matter. They will matter, but they lacked in terms of the scale of importance. That trios match, yes, it had the Joe angle, but it lacked that compared to the Young Bucks match, compared to the Hangman match or the Tony Storm match, much lesser in scale. So they could have done that. With that said, they had a big enough, bad enough card to offset, for the most part, that long runtime. Now, I don't know whoever said this, but years ago I heard someone say that tough cases make for bad law. And I think that applies here. So, this show being the length as it was, I'm going to set the record straight. Let's see. And out come the Wolves, celebrating 30 years this year. All right. We've leveled it out. We've set the record straight. And we'll say we have granted NXT a one-time NXT. Reading the chat and getting caught up. We're granting AEW a one-time exemption for a 6-hour show. Don't ever do it again. Don't learn any of the wrong lessons from this. And as well received as this show was, WWE, don't get any bright ideas. Don't start bringing back the 6-hour WrestleManias. We don't need 2 nights. We do not need 2 nights. Temperance in our wrestling will be okay. But as far as All In 2025 and the runtime, the record has been set straight. Second talking point I want to get to. The violence in the main event. So this main event, the death match between Jon Moxley and Adam Page, I think you can argue that it's maybe the biggest and most important death match in, I think, American history, but one of the biggest in all of history, one of the highest stakes death matches, at least in this millennium, for sure. So it was a huge match that if you build a big death match, it's going to have to be violent. On top of that, AEW has a reputation for putting on bloody, violent wrestling. They're criticized for putting on bloody, violent wrestling on television probably too often. And at the core of that criticism of the extensive violence was the then AEW champion, Jon Moxley. So you knew with the buildup of this, as we talked about last week, this being set up to be a coronation, culmination match. You knew this thing was going to get red right away. And it did. I rewatched it last night, and I just forgot how quickly they went to the stabbing the guy in the head with the fork spot, which I guess like Moxley and Abdullah the Butcher. Those are the fork guys. Those are the 2 new kings of fork. Although I'd feel a lot safer stabbing Moxley in the head with a fork than I would Abdullah, even though Moxley better physical shape, obviously. Unquestionably, this main event was violent. Was it about as violent as you can get on American wrestling television? Yeah, it was. However, the issue with violence never is should it or shouldn't exist in wrestling. Wrestling itself is inherently violent, and there is at least some precedent for slight escalations at the right time in violence leading to big business. What's the old saying? Red equals green. Well, if that's the case, Heyman and Mox are going to be like the richest people ever. But if you criticize this match for the violence and dismiss it for the violence, you didn't watch the match. Yes, it was excessively violent. And if that is something that just you cannot have in your wrestling, then the match wasn't for you. Obviously, you're gonna rate the match lower. You're gonna feel a certain way about it. But otherwise, in terms of what you can put on as a death match, this had all the elements of storytelling and working and all those things that all the old timers love to go on and on about, as if death matches and violent wrestling hasn't existed since the beginning of time. Is it excessive on AEW? Yes. Do they go to it too often and dilute it? Yes. It doesn't mean that the biggest match in company history is not also the venue for the most violent match in company history. And that's a good point. I'm going to take off my Grandmaster Rob thing for just a second, Fernando. I'll put up something from Matt here. But I think Matty brought up a very, very good point. I can't see because these glasses on the computer. Sorry. Matty said he thought it was smart booking. No other match was violent or had any hardcore aspect. Yeah, there was just blood. Tony Storm and Dustin both naturally bled in their matches. It was a massive payoff, and we won't see a death match for a few months. We did not see a death match for a really, really long time. I know Hangman's kind of getting this reputation as like king of the death match in AEW, but I would like that to be more related to Moxley at the top of the card of Moxley. And I don't think Mox is going to be champ anytime soon, unless Hangman gets hurt or beats someone up backstage and they have to vacate. Then anytime you have a vacated title or a title in dispute, Mox automatically gets it. It's in the Constitution of the U.S. Sorry, nothing I can do about that. Fernando says Dusty Rhodes matches were his favorite, and he's bloody all the time. I totally agree with the criticism. They do it on television too much. This was the right setting for a death match. Actually, as much as you can tell a logical story in a death match, it built up to the right spots. There was a big moment. It really all built up to a chain handed over by Swerve. So there is no loophole in this. We're going to set the record straight and declare. Right. Put the needle on right there. Main event, just right amount of violence. Record is set. All right. Another thing, let's go away from the show as a whole and the main event. Let's talk about something that was lower on the card. Let's talk about Dustin Rhodes winning the TNT title. No one had that on their bingo card, obviously, going into the weekend. Obviously, none of us could have predicted everything that happened health-wise or that's going on with Adam Cole, which is really sucks. Of all these guys of this era of his generation, it sucks that he's the guy whose body betrayed him, that we're having to live through this. And he's still young enough. I know concussions are a dicey thing. I hope he makes it back. I was fully expecting him to drop that title to Kyle Fletcher. That seemed to be the point of that match. But instead, what we got, and we heard about this, is we had on Friday, we had a match announced for the 0 Hour pre-show, which included so many of the people that were in the Fatal 4-Way. Well, actually, 2 of them. But you have both the Sons of Texas, Danny Garcia, and of course, Kyle Fletcher. Now, I'm not the first one to have this take, but I'm okay with them not putting the belt on Kyle Fletcher here, even though, as Fernando said there, he's kind of it should have been his belt. I kind of think, though, Kyle Fletcher's a future star. I'm going to say it right now. I got stock in Kyle Fletcher. If there was such thing as a wrestling stock market, I've got stock in Kyle Fletcher that I'm putting in lots of money. I mean, there's been some bad investments here. Like Gable Stevenson's stock. That killed me. I'm bankrupt from that stuff. I had MVP stock back in the day, and that had moderate returns, but I sold it maybe too soon. But hey, I'm pushing all the shit, whatever the scammy stock terms, I'm shorting or whatever it is, going all in on Kyle Fletcher. And if it was going to be a multi-person match, Kyle Fletcher's win wouldn't have been quite as cathartic or as important. Now, I think the way they booked that match was completely nonsensical, as they all just, got low blows in Kyle Fletcher the entirety of the match. I thought that was rather dumb. And then on top of that, you have Dustin winning the TNT title. Big emotional moment in the audience in Dallas that night, in Texas. Arlington, literally 5 seconds from Dallas. It's hard for me to say because in the moment, I think it was kind of the right decision because after all, they kind of just needed good feedback. They needed good feelings after. Let's face it, we got a 7-hour wrestling show here, and Adam Cole really just kind of brought us all down. Not his fault, obviously, but it had a subdued effect on the crowd. The crowd reacted to nothing in the match because there really wasn't anything to react to. They'd been given no reason to. Let's hear what Maddie has to say He says, Dustin's first title since 1999. I do believe Kyle Fletcher is a natural heel. Dustin being champion for me makes sense. Everyone loves Rhodes, and Kyle can get great heat for defeating him down the road. That's the key with this if this ends up being okay. If they get tons of heat on Kyle for beating Dustin, that this was probably all worth it. If it was just there for the pop, then I got no use for it. Fernando is saying Dustin should lose the title quick, and I have no doubt that he will. But if this becomes one of those extended old guy things in AEW, I got no use for it. As good as Dustin is, I appreciate Dustin, but when it starts getting bogged down in these programs, while interesting, but from stars from so far in the past, it just sets the wrong vibe. And especially on like a night like Saturday was, which was such a set into the future of AEW. I got to say, not a fan of it. So, for the first time in a more negative sense, and some of you guys probably disagree with me, but it doesn't matter. I am Grandmaster Rob. You're not. We're going to tilt the record just over here. Oh, the needle fell off. That's not good. And declare, set the record straight. Dustin winning the title was not the right decision. Hey, E, has Mr. Kennedy got the amount of subs to talk about why Randy Orton fired him? I'm using UZ as both my NXT correspondent and my Kennedy podcast course or YouTube channel correspondent. One more issue of concern here when it comes to AEW All In. Here's a simple question, and I did a whole show based around this a couple weeks ago, but I want to throw it out to you guys again. Is AEW back? Now, what does back mean? If it's back to their peak of like 2021 and prior to that in 2022, then I'm going to say no. They are not back. They have not reached those heights yet. They have less viewers than they did then. If you're talking about from a creative perspective, I would say that they are at least reset. They are fully reset now. They are reset from being, to logical people at least, the damaged brand from 2022 and 2023, and the brand that limped along through most of 2024. Fernando says, I think AEW is back. Tony needs to book better going forward. And that is absolutely the key. Because it could be fool's gold, right? AEW, even in their darkest of times, have always put on really good pay-per-views. And so there's never really an expectation that we're going to have a bad AEW pay-per-view. Now, sometimes, as we learned with WWE in the 2010s, you can have great wrestling on pay-per-views, but if the TV doesn't really align to it, it kind of feels meaningless. You're kind of just watching moves. You're just rooting for athleticism and not really watching wrestling in that same kind of way. Part of what made Saturday feel like such an iconic special AEW show was, I think, all the television that had led into it. You wanted to see the matches, not necessarily for the matches, but they had build. They had build that made sense to people. They had characters you were invested in. They had outcomes that people were very, very much invested in. I mean, think about that. You want to say that everyone is so smart these days? Well, if Mercedes and Mox would have walked out with AEW titles, main AEW titles, I should say, on Saturday, this chat would be a lot more lively than it is right now. And it would be going fire on AEW. And that's not where we're at. They've had decent television to this point. So I'm not going to say they're back. I'm going to say, just like this vinyl over here, it's reset. They have now a fresh and pure start. It's up to Tony to take advantage. One last comment on this. Pretty good comment here by Maddie. He says, AEW's on good form, but I feel they're just above TNA. I do feel AEW are in need of some fresh eyes and ideas. And it's weird, too, that in terms of eyes and ideas, because when they had more creative voices, it seemingly, every time in the past they've had more creative voices, their creative has seemingly fallen off a little bit. there was a famous story early on about everyone else who was responsible for that horrible end of 2019 Dynamite. And then almost right as soon as the AEW creative started to click earlier this year is right about the time we got the reports that Tony was more solidly in control, which I don't know who he was sharing that responsibility with, but take that for what it's worth. I do think there would be a benefit of like some newer philosophies and a little bit newer ideas, so it doesn't just stay the WCW with high spots promotion, which when it gets to that, it's about at its best form, but it probably needs to evolve into more of its own unique thing. Fresh Prince of Brass Ring Media, love it. That comment gets boosted. In Central New Mexico, born and raised on the message boards where I spend most of my days. I will spill water myself for saying that. Quick wardrobe change, and then back to regularly scheduled Rob programming. There we are. Back to normal Rob. Normal, family-friendly Rob. He's talking about how Stacks got turned into Jazzy Jeff on NXT, getting thrown out like that. Did you guys see that video on whatever short form content that you watch of the hockey enforcer that beat up that guy at the golf course? That's where I was thinking Jazzy Jeff. If you guys haven't seen it, it is phenomenal. I mean, this guy is like it's some drunk guy on the golf course, and he's launching him from end to end. Let me see if I could find that. Actually, that would be a good thing to have on a wrestling podcast, is a video of a hockey enforcer. I'm pretty sure we can play this. Let's see. Okay, let me get this here. We won't share audio, but let me share this tab real quick with you. Yeah, you guys can see that, right? Yeah, right. Let's put that on a full screen for you. He's fired up. His claps are the best. Oh, there they go. No. Oh, this one's a little blurry. He just threw him right into the water. I love the friend too. Friend is just bleeding, and my guy has to come right back out of the swamp, but he still has to confront him. And he takes him down. Look at that. Oh man, those are some potatoes right there. He's throwing. I think the drunk guy stands back up. Oh, he just tosses him. The guy. How does the guy not get the hint? And then he goes, "Whoa!" and he's out there. Friend is trying to help him. All right, that was a great moment on a wrestling podcast. Thank you for indulging that. Brandon, what's up, Brandon? He's asking, what are your thoughts on Jolly Road team up with Randy Orton against Logan Paul and Drew McIntyre? Like whatever. You know what I mean? I think there's better things for Randy Orton and Drew McIntyre to be doing, but it kind of neutralizes what Logan Paul is doing. And I think it'll ultimately probably be okay, although quite frivolous. But as we mentioned earlier, there's 2 nights of SummerSlam to fill up, and I think we could have got a lot more off of off of those guys than doing that match. With Seth gone under, should WWE pivot from the faction on Raw and separate Braun Breaker from Bronson? I don't think so. They just have to figure out that lead mouthpiece and what that's really going to look like. But I don't think it's going to happen now. I had CM Punk maybe joining them, really selling out, but that's not going to happen. I think you keep them together and you figure out a way to keep that snake strong. I really do. All right. So one last thing I want to talk about before we get on to AEW is Jelly Roll does look like a car mechanic. I'm mad at him for his weight loss too. Like, shout out to him as a person for doing that. But like, if we'd like you for looking like Jelly Roll, why are you losing weight on us? That'd be like, I don't know. It'd be like Big Show being short all of a sudden. Like, isn't that kind of the appeal? I used to feel like Jelly Roll was made in a lab to appeal to every possible demographic. Like Jelly Roll just picks all the ticks all the boxes. Well, I mean, the precedent for that is the guy we mentioned, Kennedy, right? If they would do that, but let's see how that plays out. Brandon said, "Yeah, Jelly Roll is supposed to look like jelly." Yeah. What are we doing here, people? Stick to the gimmick. All right. One more thing I want to talk about, and it's about that main event we had on Sunday. That main event is one of these instances in wrestling where wrestling feels real. And let me explain. Last time I checked, and you guys can contradict me if I'm wrong in the chat, wrestling's a work, right? I think it is. Okay. Wrestling is predetermined. 90% of people talking about it on the internet, even like very marquee people going to shows, they all know it's a work. They have since like the 60s. Despite what the old timers will tell you, kayfabe, or the idea of kayfabe, has never quite existed in the way that they would like you to believe. With that said, there are some victories that are more real than the other. So what I'm going to do now, and I'm going to explain what I'm talking about here, if that doesn't make any sense to you guys, is I'm going to go through, and this is not a comprehensive list. It's just 5 examples of wrestling wins that felt real. That's a little bit different than what I talked about last week with the coronations, because coronations are about these big builds and this big time and putting this baby face on top and all that. This is specifically about the victory and why it felt real despite it being in a worked sport. Now, there's many of these over the years, but I am admittedly starting very, very late. I'm starting in 2004. So a wrestling win to me that very much felt real was this one, when Eddie shocked Brock at No Way Out 2004. I don't have a picture of it up here, but the celebration that Eddie has at the end of that match is one of the wildest things that you've ever seen. I guess the equivalent might be CM Punk and Money in the Bank 2011, which is not on this list, but absolutely could be. If you looking back to that match, for one, Eddie was the first of these like mid-carders who came out of nowhere and suddenly had to be taken serious as a champion. Although Eddie had been booked relatively strong throughout 2003, just no one at the top of their mind thought of him as world champion material. He had feuded with Chavo Guerrero the pay-per-view before this. So make of that what you will. He was too short. He was older. Good one, E. Really good one that belongs on this list. Not on this list, but that's a great one, E. All of those things were in place. He was going up against Brock Lesnar. We didn't know at the time Brock Lesnar had his dream of playing for the Vikings, hint, hint, wink, wink, in his pocket. For his part, Brock Lesnar had just squashed Bob Holly the month before. So this felt like a placeholder February before WrestleMania feud and match, if there ever was one. And then Eddie won. And then the weight of Eddie won sunk in. The way they framed it and the addictions he had overcome, his journey from WCW, him being so short in the land of the giants, and of course, beating Brock freaking Lesnar. That was a victory that felt real, felt genuine, felt legitimate. I shouted him out, so I'll put it up there because it happened on the same night as the next one I'm going to talk about. He's saying Brock beating Undertaker. 100% that qualifies as a real wrestling victory. A lot of the ones I'm talking about tonight are baby faces, so they do kind of go in more with my discussion last week of coronations. But you can just as easily have a lot of heel wins that were very, very much real. And Brock Lesnar winning had real consequences to real things. Real careers were affected. Fans were really mad for a lot of years. They got a lot of heat on Brock Lesnar for all that. People have conspiracy theories about it because they wouldn't accept it as what it was. That's a great example. Great shout out E of wrestling being real. Fernando says he was shocked when Eddie won. It's still to me one of the best. If you just want to see like, oh my God, this actually happened in wrestling, it's one of the best to put on there. All right, the next one was Daniel Bryan defeating Evolution / The Authority at WrestleMania 30. This was real for a few reasons. It was real for the fact that, kayfabe or not, the entirety of the wrestling audience viewed Daniel Bryan as this underdog that wasn't able to get his shot at the top, that was being kept down by the most powerful people in the company. Eventually, they turned that into a storyline, but it was absolutely the real deal. And don't say it's just what dirt sheet writers say. I don't know. Read Bryan Danielson's book, and he will tell you all about that. As Fernando noted, there was a yes movement that went along with it. Natural and organic. Even though I did say a few comments about that last week. This built for months and months, and you felt like as an audience, you influenced this. To me, that's what makes this real. It's kind of like for a great college sports team that has really good home court or home field advantage. As a fan of one of those schools, you feel like you took part in that victory that the team got. Now, you didn't do anything athletically, strategically. All you did was yell and like cuss out the guys on the other team, but you still feel like you contributed to it. And this was a case, I think, of fans feeling like they'd contributed to something with meaningful change. It mattered. It felt, even for just a little bit of time, almost like a cultural movement had occurred. So that's another win in wrestling that felt real. And the next one, we'll fast forward it another 4 years, was a match that was actually rematched on the All In card on Saturday. And that would be Omega taking a really, really long time to finally beat Okada at Dominion 2018. Omega Okada has been on the brain lately because of, obviously, they just had a match on Saturday. So I was thinking about, and I think about this as one of those things in wrestling that really was real. How long was Okada the champ for at this point? It was like forever. He seemed like an eternal champion. They really had 3 classic matches that the hype had to live up to. They were literally the most hyped matches in wrestling history if we look at the rating scale. And those matches broke the freaking rating scale. So you have a weight of expectations, and there's sort of like kayfabe expectations on top of that. Plus, it's Kenny's journey. Plus, it's like this unbeatable champion. It's this guy who's finally been set up in this more babyface turn. And it, again, something that kind of felt almost like a cultural movement in the time. Didn't last very long. By the next Wrestle Kingdom, we were already geared up for AEW. But in that moment, with that long, long match, with that long title reign, with all the expectations, that win felt real. Fernando says the double turn at WrestleMania 13. I don't have a lot to add to that. It's just, I know if you're cool or not. If I go on your Peacock subscription and I go on WrestleMania 13 and it's not starting at the Chicago Street Fight, we can't be friends. Because that means that you have to constantly watch the WrestleMania 13 main event and it starts at the Street Fight. So that's the way we can be friends. Kofi Mania, another thing that felt like a cultural movement. Another thing that felt real. There's real excitement when Kofi won. The next one on this list, obviously, Cody finishes Roman. WrestleMania 40. Yeah, it's obvious. Yeah, you knew it was going to be on here. But this has tons of weight to it. A lot of the elements I just talked about. You have Roman Reigns being the champ for 4 years coming into this. You have Cody Rhodes and all the story and coming over for the other company and not being booked to win the year prior when most people thought he was going to win. And then on top of that, you have The Rock meddling in this and canceling this main event about 2 months before this happened. That is why every part of that win feels like a triumph. Azan says he still hates seeing Bruce come out. I appreciate Bruce taking a long time to get out there. I appreciate Bruce trying to get to the ring as quickly as possible because he knew no one wanted to see him. I think there's a great comedy in the fact that only Cody was into Bruce there. Right now, and I know like obviously there's still the something to wrestle faction, but there was a time when Bruce was like the biggest like smarky guy to get cheered for in wrestling. I think if we just brought out Bruce every week, he would get more heat than like anyone. Yeah, Montreal was real, but there's sort of a kayfabe on the screen though too. I mean, Montreal, the definition of real. I mean, we could do like New Jack moments that felt real, and that would be a hell of a list. Let's go on one on AEW, even though this culminates in an AEW one. And I will say it is when Danielson beat Swerve at last year's All In. Titled that one, The Dragon Lives. These kind of retirement-ish matches, if they're going to honor the stipulation, those matches very much matter and are very much real. The problem with that is usually when we're building to a big retirement match, there's like the implicit acknowledgement that that person is retiring at the end of said match. When you see this match, it's like, and we know he wasn't a full-time retirement, but he would be going away, basically being de-emphasized if you were to lose that match. If you are a Danielson fan, regardless if you're a kayfabe Mark fan, regardless if you're the smarkiest Smark of all time, as long as you're a Danielson fan, that 3 count means everything to you. And the fact that there was so many near falls, the fact that it was such an epic match and they played on that, to me, that is, as the kids say, that is your absolute cinema right there. And as Azan is saying, that's the link to this year's All In. I mean, and next year when Ospreay is challenging for the title at All In, I guess we will sort of connect this match to that. Which if you're booking year to year like that in like a WrestleMania to WrestleMania form, that's pretty good. I think that's a pretty good setup that you have. I am looking forward to a heel Swerve Strickland feuding with Hangman going forward. I think that's going to be awesome if that's the direction they go in. I think they need heels. They got lots of baby faces. They need some heels. Yeah, my producers in my ear tell me it was a submission finish, even though I said that 3 count. Either like when the hands hit the mat, producer. Aren't you busy watching AEW right now, producer? I think you mean, is that Birdie you're saying there? Bride. All right. And finally, the wrestling win that felt real was Saturdays when the Cowboy saved AEW. Jon Moxley was legitimately a hated champion. As silly as it is, in a wrestling gimmick, it was the truth that fans had not seen the AEW title. There were consequences to that. There has been a consequence in fans' minds to Jon Moxley being the champion. There is a consequence for AEW seemingly still kind of going with older AEW or WWE names instead of going with their real future guys. And it feels like the whole fate of the will of the company was on the line in this match. There's a lot of outcomes that a lot of wrestling matches could have, but had Mox have defeated Hangman here, we're looking at like Starrcade 97. We're all the things I talked about last week or a couple weeks ago where people had blown their big moments. That would have been the case. So just in that alone makes that a real wrestling win, in my opinion. Look at that. Despite the short show, I'm going to have you guys out of here just in time to watch AEW this week, the follow up. Man, what a letdown this weekend's going to be, right? Like, I mean, it'd be cool. You could see your family, friends, all that good stuff. But like spending the weekend like on social media debating matches or watching people debate matches. I don't tweet anything, but seeing that was the way to go. That was the way to go. Yeah, Fernando, you were saying it last week, and you were probably the most skeptical that it might not happen. I think the skepticism was deserved, was warranted, but thankfully, for at least one night, AEW came through. You like the Darby turn? Yeah, I feel bad for him. He kind of missed his moment just slightly, but I think there's more story to tell there. Let's see. What do you guys think? I mean, we have about a minute here. Brian's wrestling in the future. Is it going to happen? Hope so. All right, guys. It's the top of the hour. We could bleed into AEW Dynamite, but I think this is the week that you guys probably want to watch live and see what the follow-up is. So I am going to go ahead and excuse myself. I'm going to say bye to Grandmaster Rob. Thanks for pitching in, Grandmaster Rob. We'll do it again in the future. And I will talk to all of you guys next Wednesday.